So, hi everybody again, and welcome to Tanya in Real Life. We're up to Tanya Perek Zayin. But what we're going to do today is we're actually going to do Zayin and Ches. And Mirza Hashem, next week, we're going to also speed a little bit because I really want to get to the really juicy prakim, the really juicy chapters about how to be a Beinani. And that I want to try to get that in before Pesach. So here we are. We're going to do Zayin and Ches very as quickly as we can. So we are in the middle of discussing our nefesh habahamis, our animal self. In the previous parak, in the previous chapter, we defined some very key words. We said that sitra achra is anything that's not on the side of kedusha. It's the other side. Sitra achra, the other side of kedusha. So then what's kedusha? Kedusha is where Hashem's light is manifest. Where is their kedusha? What's the invitation? What's the key? What's the door to opening ourselves up, to experiencing, to letting in Hashem's light? That is wherever there is bittel. Anyone or anything that is bittel to Hashem, that is where there is kedusha. Where there is bittel, there is kedusha, meaning wherever there is bittel, that's where Hashem's light, Hashem's special charged energy is more present. That's the key to blessings, right? So now we want to know what bittel is. Bittel is complete awareness of our dependency on Hashem. And in explaining what bittel is, the Baal Tanya gives us a picture. He points to malachim who have complete bittel. They're always aware of Hashem's presence. And in that state of awareness, they know they have no other agenda. They're here clearly in this world by Hashem, with Hashem, for Hashem. So they have no other agenda of their own. They have nothing of their own. That's perfectly clear for them. And every yid has the potential of that level of bittel, that utter awareness that we are here in this world by Hashem's power, with Hashem's loving presence, and for a purpose that is, for Hashem to express that truth, to express Hashem's truth wherever we are and whatever we're doing. Now, the opposite of bittel, we understand more of what bittel is when the Baal Tanya says what the opposite of bittel is that when we think we're in a state of not bittel, when we think that we are a self-sufficient entity independent of Hashem. So anything that presents itself as separate or independent from Hashem is the opposite of bittel. Now, we started using, I'm not sure if we spoke about this last week, but we definitely spoke about it before. Just to make it more simple to understand, what we're to reference, when we're going to talk about bittel, being in a state of bittel, bittel is that state of perfect, absolute, not perfect, but awareness of Hashem, awareness of our self as dependent on Hashem. So I'm going to call a state of bittel true self, because that is the truth about who we are. That is the truth about ourselves, that we are utterly dependent on Hashem. We're powered by Hashem, and we're here for Hashem, with Hashem. So I'm going to call bittel true self. And the opposite of bittel is going to be, I'm going to call it ego, because that to me is the definition, as the Baal Tanya says very clearly, when we think that we are a self-sufficient entity, that's ego. Ego is the invention, our created version of ourselves when we are not fully connected and aware of our true self. So anything that presents itself as separate from Hashem, or a space in our lives, in our minds, in our hearts that is unaware of our dependence on Hashem, that is our ego. By contrast, wherever we are aware of Hashem's presence, that's our true self. That's our neshama shining forth. That's our awareness of Hashem, or our bittel. Now, when we're aware of Hashem's presence, our behaviors are going to flow from that awareness. Our choices are going to reflect that awareness. And when we do that, we are receiving energy, we're receiving life-giving force, vitality directly from Hashem in a direct way. And when we lose sight of our awareness, we learned this also in last parak, when we lose sight of our dependence on Hashem, when that happens, when we see ourselves as self-sufficient beings, and our behaviors flow from that place of non-awareness, that's when we received Hashem's chayas in a backhanded sort of way. And this has really played itself out in history many times. We're coming soon. We're less than a month away to Purim. And in Purim, the Gemara tells us that, Bnei Yisrael, why were they deserving of such a terrible gezerah? Because they because they enjoyed Achashverosh's Suda. And the question is obvious, like the punishment doesn't match the crime. Like what you went to a Suda, so you deserve to die? Okay, maybe we need to repair that. We need to correct it. We need to become aware of our mistake. We need to, we need to reconnect. We need to understand that that wasn't the right thing to do. But death of men, women, and children, young, old, it seems incongruous with what we did wrong. And Hasidus explains that it wasn't, we're not talking about a punishment here, but a natural state of being. When we are in a state of dependence on Hashem, when we are aware of Hashem's power, when we are aware of our complete dependence on his blessings and on his goodness and kindness and his presence in our lives, we invite his blessings. That's the doorway to opening his blessings. And by contrast, when we take on this idea that we are self-sufficient, I don't need you, Hashem, you know that famous joke of the guy who's looking for a parking and he's having such a hard time finding a parking space. And then he's like, God, if you find me a spot, I will donate $50 to charity today. And as he finishes his prayer, a parking spot opens up and he turns up, he waves his hand up and says, never mind, God, I found a place on my own, But so that's a joke. But when we have this illusion, when we, the joke is, it's a joke, but really the kernel of truth in that joke, like every joke has a kernel of truth, and that's what makes it funny, is that we all buy into that illusion. We have this idea that we sometimes buy into, that we often buy into, that we're doing this on our own. We're on our own in this world. So Nenu Misudase Shel Russia, when Bnei Yisrael, when the Yidden went to that party, the problem wasn't that they went to the party. The problem was that they enjoyed it, that they felt so privileged and important to be invited by the king. Like, now we arrived, now we made it, now we have it in our lives. We are good with the king. We have political connections in place. We're all set to have the good life. And in a certain sense, that attitude, that feeling stemmed from the belief that Achashverosh had true power in their lives. And that was a step away from the complete dependence on Hashem. And it was not the act, just the act of going to the Seuda, going to the feast of Achashverosh. It was the notion that we are dependent on someone other than Hashem. And that is the root of all our misery and the dysfunction and the chaos and the suffering in our lives. Okay, now nobody should take this to mean that if I have pain in my life, it means that I am not good enough in my trust in Hashem. It's just that, don't take that to mean, because in today's world, everything is so mixed up and chaotic, and we have no idea Hashem's plan or Hashem's reasoning, and such good people have such terrible, painful situations. It's not our place to judge ourselves or anyone based on the blessings that we have or the blessings that we do not have in our lives. At the same time, opening the doorways, opening our hearts to really leaning on Hashem is definitely a good way it's a key to opening up a storehouse of blessings in our lives. Okay, so that was all last parak. Now, in this parak, in this chapter, the Baal Tanya describes a spectrum of, because last time he was like telling us that there is bittel, there's kedusha, and then there's the opposite of that, right? Now we're going to say that within kedusha and within klipa, there's actually a spectrum beginning from the center. And if you look at the notes, I put this a little bit on a chart in like 3 boxes. The one in the middle, this one on the right says kedusha. The translation of the word kedusha, we translate this to mean holiness. But I want to make a very strong point. When the Baal Tanya is telling us kedusha means holiness, he doesn't mean how hard somebody shuckles or sways when they daven. He doesn't mean how big or beautiful the person's esrog is, or how long the person's skirt is, or what. Kedusha means one thing. Holiness means one thing. It means anything that clearly expresses Hashem's truth and is not an expression of somebody's ego. Okay. Now, then we have klipas noiga. Klipa means a shell. A shell means something that's concealing Hashem's presence, concealing Hashem's exposure, right? And noiga, the word noiga means to shine. So klipas noiga is anything that conceals Hashem's presence. It doesn't necessarily doesn't reflect Hashem's truth. It's not an expression of Hashem's truth, but it has the potential to express Hashem's truth. For example, if I have a cup of water, the cup of water in itself doesn't scream, hey, God is true, Hashem is true, he's the one who created all the water in the world. No, it's just water. It says, I exist, I am here. And in presenting itself as an existence on its own, that is the definition of klipa, the illusion or the assumption that this exists on its own. So water on its own is klipa, but it's klipas noiga because it has the potential to be elevated to a state of kedusha. Because when we make a bracha on that cup of water, or when we drink that water with the intention to be refreshed so that we will better be able to serve Hashem, we have now that water became an expression of Hashem's truth, of Hashem's emes. And then we have further left on the spectrum, we have certain things in this world. And by the way, klipas noiga is most of the world, most of the activities that we are engaged in, most of the things that we, encounter. Look around your room, look around your house. Most things or most activities in your day are klipas noiga. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But by contrast, gimel klipas hatmeis, klipa still means a shell, but timeis is translated as impure. And it doesn't mean that it's dirty. It doesn't mean that it didn't wash negavaser. It doesn't mean that, it was dipped in sand, or, people have very interesting definitions of what impure means. In the context of our discussion, impure means anything that conceals Hashem's truth, and it's completely impure when it has no potential. Hashem did not give it the potential to express Hashem's truth. This understanding, this word gives us a deeper understanding, deeper insight into the expressions that we use, the terminology that we use in halacha. We use the word mutar and asr to express what is permissible and what is not permissible. Really, the word mutar means untied, where asr means bound. Anything that, and why do we say the word mutar, like it's unbound, it's untied? Because the fact that it's untied means it's possible, it's hiding Hashem, but it's not tied down to that state of hiddenness. It has the potential to be elevated to a state of kedusha by being used for kedusha, for Hashem's, to express Hashem's presence, Hashem's truth. By contrast, asur means it's tied up, it's bound. That means no matter what you do to it, no matter how many times you may have the perfect shchita knife and shech that animal exactly according to halacha, but if it's not a kosher animal, it's not kosher. Okay, it's not. You can't. There's nothing that you could do to untie that, to liberate that hiddenness from its state of hiddenness. And it will always be a concealment of Hashem's truth until Mashiach comes, when there will be no more of Hashem's hiddenness in the world at all. Okay, so the gray in the middle is the middle ground, and it's most of our lives, most of the opportunities that we have, most of the activities that we do. In the Baal Tanya's words, the gray center, that klipas noiga, is he bechinas memutzaas bein shalosh klipas hatmeis. This is the middle ground, the intermediary between the concealment of Hashem that cannot be elevated, it's completely concealed, uvein bechinas umadregus hakadusha, and the state of and things, objects or people or activities that are complete expressions of Hashem's presence. Now, most of what we do all day and most of the things we are engaged in our lives are going to be in the category of klipas nega. So the question is, what happens with klipas nega? What actually happens when we use something or when we engage in an activity? Whenever we use klipas nega objects or engage in any klipas nega activities, what's going on is that the energy within it always moves. It always moves. There's no such thing as doing something that has no impact. It's so mind-boggling if you take a minute to think about it, the power that we have in this world, the unbelievable, the incredible power that we have in this world. It's impossible for you, for me, for any of us to use a physical object and not have an impact on that object. It's impossible for us to engage in activity and for it to be completely unimpactful. It's just such an incredible thing if we realize how much power Hashem places into our hands. Whenever we use klipas nega activities, objects, or engage in klipas nega activities, the energy in it is going to be moved by us. What's going to move it? And by the way, we move along with it, because let's say I eat something, so that energy is now within me, so it impacts me. So where do we move it? It all depends, right? That's a typical Jewish answer, right? Where does it go? It depends. It depends on how we have used it or how we have engaged it. How we do it and where we how we do it determines where we go with it. So if when we're focused on serving Hashem, when we're aware of Hashem's presence and our actions, our behavior is flowing from that place of awareness, we elevate whatever we're using to a state of kedusha, which is extremely powerful. There are so many stories of tzaddikim where, the Baal Shem Tov went out of his way with his Talmidim to go to a specific spring of water because that specific water needed to be elevated to a place of kedusha, needed for a yid to make a bracha, to pronounce Hashem's truth, to say this water exists because Hashem created it. And with that action, with that behavior, with that blessing, to elevate that water to a state of kedusha, to a state of now that water is an expression of Hashem's truth. There are so many countless stories of tzaddikim that focus on that idea. And my favorite children's book, which is actually written by my dear cousin Esther Fingerer, called The Little Wheat Kernel. My favorite children's book. It talks about how a little wheat kernel, how it's planted in the ground and then it grows up and it so badly wants to be used for a mitzvah, and it follows the wheat kernel on its little journey as it's made into flour and then it's made into a product, and how it's so satisfied and delighted and its dream comes true when somebody makes a blessing on it, when somebody makes a bracha, how the little wheat kernel is so happy. And I love that story because I always think about it and I tell it to my children in 100 different ways, because it's such an important, because we have that power to the whole world. All of creation depends on us to elevate it to a state where it clearly demonstrates Hashem's presence. And we know that when Hashem's presence will be expressed in the whole world, that's the state of Geula. So every time we do that, we are bringing Mashiach closer for ourselves, for the whole world. Okay, that was a sales pitch for being conscious of Hashem, especially when we eat, which is such a common thing. In all of these activities that we do, eating, sleeping, dancing, exercising, working, cooking, whatever we're doing, we are either contributing to the exposure of Hashem's light in the world, or we are adding to the concealment. There's nothing benign about our action. We're either, I always say it like this, we're part of the problem or part of the solution. We're part of the solution of Geula, or we're part of the problem called Galus. We're either adding to Hashem's light or adding to Hashem's concealment. And so when we look around the world, there's so many gray areas. There's so many undefined objects, or there are so many objects and behaviors and activities. You look at the day ahead, it's all open to definition. Every minute of your day is open to being defined. It's open to being defined by you. It's either going to be defined as, so it's open. It's not defined. It's limitless in its possibilities, right? And yet, when it comes to our behavior, there's no gray. Every behavior is either going to be black or white. And I know that sounds harsh. We're going to talk about that harshness in a minute. But we are always either in a state of bittel or in a state of ego. We're always aware of Hashem's our dependence on Hashem, or we're not aware of our dependence on Hashem. And in our non-awareness of our dependence on Hashem, we're dependent on ourselves. We're dependent on our egos. We're dependent on other people who we think, right? That's all comes back to our ego. Depending on other people who we think have the power is also our ego. Okay. So when we're in a state of bittul, we're drawing down Hashem's light around ourselves and into the world. And when we're in a state of ego, we're adding to the concealment of Hashem. We're concealing Hashem's light from ourselves. We're getting stuck in more unawareness, and we're adding a layer of concealment that blocks our own consciousness of Hashem and in the world. So that's a very that might sound very harsh and intimidating because and overwhelming, right? Because to think that every one of my actions has an impact that's so of such magnitude is pretty scary. But let's talk about this. It also offers clarity. And I feel that clarity is the biggest blessing when it comes to emotional wellness. I'll tell you why. Because no person finds themselves one day lost in a forest. Nobody wakes up. They were sleeping in their bed at night and suddenly they're lost in a forest. By the same token, nobody wakes up in the morning and is suddenly in full-blown ego, okay? In full unawareness of Hashem's presence. It doesn't happen like that. The state of being lost always begins with one step in the opposite direction of where we want to go. Always. It's always that way. We don't, you're on a path, you're on a hiking trip, and the minute we take that first step off the beaten trail, off the trail that's clearly marked and labeled and defined, the minute we take a step off, we are already lost. It's just about a matter of time until we're going to get, chas v'shalom, more lost. But we don't find ourselves lost suddenly hours away from civilization. It all begins with one step. And why do we take that step? What makes us take that step off the path? There's only one reason why we take that step. It's because we think it doesn't matter. It's because we think it won't impact us. It doesn't really make a difference. What is the value of one moment, of one choice, of one step in a new direction, in a direction that I'm not sure I really want to go in, right? One step always leads to another, but we think that it doesn't really matter. And in the analogy, it's the same thing. We don't feel distant from our neshama all of a sudden one day. We feel distant one step at a time, right? We do one little, if it would be open to, if there would be like, okay, you have to do 50 quote unquote acts of unawareness in order to feel the impact. I personally would do the 50, right? And we would lose count. It's so helpful to know, just stay in a state of consciousness. Stay as much as possible in a state of consciousness, because we are always one step out of consciousness is just as impactful as 20 in a certain sense, because you're either aware of Hashem or you're not aware of Hashem. You're either in the light or you're in the dark. You're either bringing Mashiach or you're perpetuating the gullus. There's no in between. Yes, our whole day is up to us to define. It's open. It's all gray. There's no colors. It's it has the potential for any color on the rainbow. But every action does have a color. Every action that we do does have a definition. It's either an extension, a reflection, or an expression of our bittel, or a reflection of our ego. And by the way, just want to share on a personal level, I learned this a week or two ago. I was reviewing it and it inspired me to stop reading the news, because I realized that my reading the news is not benign. It really makes me feel connected with the fearsome reality of politics, of all that fakeness and all that stuff that's going on. It really made me feel connected. And so I stopped reading it at all. I don't, and I'm not saying this to say anything about myself. I'm saying this because it's such a gift. um in the first few days, it was really like I had to really, it was like feeling detoxifying myself. But I know that when I clicked on the news and read the news, it definitely left me feeling unsettled at the pit of my stomach. It left me being impacted by a certain reality that is just not consistent with Hashem's reality. And that's impossible. Not It's impossible. Whether the news, and today obviously the news is much more, I'll call it colorful, or fearsome, much more fearsome. But I think this is true with any news or um, any activity that is clearly not aligned with Hashem. And this was something where I was able to grow. But if you look at your lives, you look at your life and see, where in my life can I express more of Hashem's presence, of Hashem's truth? Or where in my life is there something that I'm doing that is getting in my way of really being open to Hashem's truth, because it's denying Hashem's truth, because it's hiding Hashem's truth? I'm sure we can all find something, and I know that I keep finding new things every day, and it's just such a blessing. Because when the more, let's just remember, this is not just about, if I would be talking to your neshama, I would say, because your neshama wants to shine, because your neshama wants to be expressed, because your neshama is your true self. But I'm not talking to your neshama. I am talking to your animal self right now. I'm telling you that our animal self, our human dimension, wants to feel healthy, wants to feel whole, wants to feel happy, wants to feel secure, wants to have courage. We need emotional stability in our lives now more than ever, specifically because the world is so chaotic. As we get closer and closer to Mashiach, the chaos seems to be churning with more intensity. So we need inner security and inner courage and inner clarity much more than ever. And so for that, what's our wealth? What's our source for all that goodness that we want? It's only Hashem. The more we value Hashem, the more we are aware of Hashem, we'll value Hashem. And the more we value Hashem, the more we will value his presence within us, and the more we can benefit from his presence within us. So, okay, so that was a plug for, just to connect that to everything that we've been talking about, emotional wellness. Now, I want to just say that whenever there is something that has a lot of potency in kedusha, the yetzer hara is going to try to sneak in and get in our way and use that very thing against us. So when we know that every choice has a major impact, that every choice we do matters, the yetzer hara can use our caring and our commitment and our determination to stay aware of Hashem. He can use that against us. And by that, I mean, I can easily find myself sitting in a puddle of shame because of something that I did, because of behavior that I did, because of an action that I took. And that would be the opposite of what Hashem wants, because we know that famous Hasidic word, right? That's Hasidic saying, I think it's from the Kotzker Rebbe or Reb Arla Karliner, what depression is not a sin, but what depression can do, no sin can do, right? Later on in Tanya, the Baal Tanya talks about it as well, that the impact of shame, the worthlessness, that sense of worthlessness, and the behavior that flows from that sense of shame and worthlessness and indignity, and I am such a loser and a failure and a lowlife, whatever stems from that place is always going to be much worse than the behavior, that mistake that got us there in the first place. So that's a yetzer hara. So thinking about that, I just wanted to put it out there. Also, sometimes a person might be struggling with a compulsion to do the right thing. You know, I see a lot of people struggling with guilt. How do I know when it's okay to say no? How do I know when it's okay to say yes? How do I know when I, washed negavaser one time too many, or maybe I washed again because I needed to wash again? Maybe, I didn't daven, I didn't say, maybe I didn't say the bracha acharena, so I'm supposed to say it again. You know what I mean? So how do we really know when we are, and that behavior, that kind of thinking could become extremely self-destructive when we start being so fearful of our choices that we kind of become obsessed with it. And that obsession could be destructive in and of itself. So here are some keys to differentiate. What does it look like when I am in a state of ego, when you are in a state of ego, versus when we are in a state of bittel? What does it look like? What are some keys to look out for? And I'm going to share some thoughts, and then I'll wrap up the parak, and then we'll go back to discuss this. Okay. So I thought of three things, three keys that define the difference between being in a state of ego and being in a state of bittel. Okay. So number one is fear. Our neshama is never afraid of being disconnected from Hashem. Our neshama trusts the connection because our neshama is the connection. Okay? Our neshama is never afraid of being disconnected from Hashem. Our neshama does not want us to do an avera, but our neshama is not afraid of being disconnected from Hashem. So any choice we make out of fear, even if it's a holy fear, even if it's a holy fear of not being good enough or not being connected to Hashem enough, any choice that we make out of fear is probably coming from our ego and not from our true consciousness of Hashem's presence in our lives. If it's a choice that's coming from a place of fear, even if it's a holy fear, because the yetzer hara makes, for some people who are especially sensitive, and I know that many of you are on this call right now, right? Your neshama, and I can relate to this because my neshama does this to me too, comes dressed as a holy tzaddik and says, watch out, this, you're not good enough. Okay. So even that holy, but any action that we do from the place of fear, even if it's a quote unquote, a holy fear, a fear of, not being good enough, or a fear of not being connected enough, chas v'shalom, to Hashem, because we always, always, always are connected. That behavior is coming from our ego and not from our bittel, because in bittel, we want to do more mitzvahs, but we don't have any fear. We trust Hashem is taking care of us. So if you find yourself doing an action out of fear, I would suggest, right then and there, that's a state of bittel. Whoops, don't go. I mean, that's a state of ego. Don't go down that line, and do what it takes for you to get back into a state of bittel. For every person, what's the path to return to a state of bittel? That I would like to discuss after this, okay? So we have to discuss what's the path to return to a state of bittel. Let me just put it out there quickly, because once I put that question in my head, and probably in your head, let's just put that, some thoughts out there. Getting to a state of bittel is just thinking about what we know about Hashem, reminding ourselves of the truth. For me personally, I always think about, Hashem is the only power. I have a few lines in my mind that I keep going back to. Hashem is the only power. He's the only one in charge of my needs. A few lines and I recommend that, come up with a few lines that remind you that everything in your life, and they should be your own words. That's why I'm not putting out my own words. They should be your own words, because that will resonate with you and make a difference to you, and they'll be meaningful to you. Something that reflects Hashem's exclusive power and our utter dependency on Hashem. That kind of helps us get back into a state of bittel. And if there's a loophole, if there's a place where you keep slipping, then think about the idea that directly addresses that mud hole. Like if you think you're not good enough, then just say, I am, Hashem loves me the way I am, even if I make a mistake. Whatever it is, come up with some line that is the truth that's opposite to the lie that you're tripping on in a place of ego. Okay, so the first thing is fear. The second thing is disempowerment. Our neshama is the source of our empowerment. It's the source of, it's what gives us the power to choose. Our neshama is that place in us that has the truth, that has the power to choose, that is not limited to circumstances and situations and conditions and the past and our habits. And, from the place of our body, from the place of our human dimension, we are limited by our circumstances. And by this, I don't mean that our neshama gives us the possibility to fly. We don't have wings, right? Chas v'shalom, nobody should have that illusion that we could fly. Our neshama doesn't make us into someone that we are not. I'm talking about in being able to have courage, dignity, respectability. I'm talking about any emotional quality, tolerance, acceptance, patience, love, belonging, all the things of emotional health, or the ability just to choose our behavior, which is a huge, 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 huge deal in our lives, because when we feel empowered to choose our behavior, we are healthy. The biggest the most destructive force is when we decide that we just, we're not in charge of our behavior anymore, when we surrender that power to other people or to other things, right? So our neshama is that part of us that gives us the power of choice, that says no matter what you did yesterday, your brain is wired to do that again. Your body is wired to do that behavior again. But today, your neshama says today, you could make a difference. Today, you could choose. Today, you have the power to show up in any way you want, because today is undefined. According to Hashem, it's a brand new moment and a brand new opportunity to show up in whatever way you want. So our neshama is the part of us that gives us that empowerment. And so if you ever feel disempowered, if you feel compelled, that is a sign that it's our ego. Even when the behavior is a mitzvah, it's always a choice. We're never compelled. The choice to do a mitzvah is obviously very appealing to our neshama, but it's still a choice, not a compulsion. And I'm saying this about a mitzvah because sometimes when people feel like they need to do that mitzvah again, need to say the bracha again, or need to, wash negavaser one more time, but they didn't wash it perfectly, and now I'm going to be tummy the whole day. That feeling of compulsion is an indicator that we are being driven by ego. Ego says, I can be perfect, therefore I'm going to try again. So I'm going to, I'm dependent on myself, therefore I must be perfect. So I'm going to do this again, and this time I'll get it to perfection. Bittel says, I'm dependent on Hashem, and all I have to do is give it my best shot, and I will never be perfect. And that's perfectly acceptable to Hashem. We don't have to wash our hands 3 times. So again, if you're feeling disempowered, if from the power of choice, if you're feeling compelled to do anything, whether it's take another drink, whether it's sit on that internet website for another minute, turning the page of a novel, turning another page of the novel, or even if it's a mitzvah like washing negavaser again, or saying a bracha again, or checking for kashrus again, or toveling again. It's anytime you're in a state of compulsion, disempowered from the power of choice, it's coming from our ego and not from a place of bittel. And the third thing is joy and courage. In Koheles, we learn oiz v'chedva b'mekoymai. Joy and courage. Oiz, courage and joy are in his place. Wherever there is kedusha, wherever there is bittel, there is joy and there is courage. So when we're not feeling joyous and we're not feeling courageous, that's a sign that our yetzer hara, our ego, has hijacked our system, and it's time to get out of there. Get out of, to where Tzvi Friedman has such a great line. He says, we're all prisoners, but we sit on the keys. We tend to become prisoners of our ego, but we sit on the keys. And the reason why that's such a painful reality at times is because the keys, the possibility for change is within our own hands, right? We are the ones who imprison ourselves, who limit ourselves to our ego, and we have the ability to change, but we sit on it, meaning we sit on the keys is an indicator, is a way of saying that it's really, it's hard. It's not so easy to change. But through all the prakim that we've learned so far, we know that the shift into a state of bittel is simply turning on the light of awareness of Hashem's truth, of Hashem's presence. It might mean we need to proactively plug in and recharge our awareness more by learning more about Hashem, learn chayvas halavavais, shahar bitachon. So many people have shared such incredible transformation from learning that. Learn more, Tanya. Learn more things that give you more awareness of Hashem's presence. And the more we do that, the more easy. And then when we find ourselves in a state of ego, we can just turn on the light of awareness and walk back in. So every time we build our awareness, it helps that when we slip away from that awareness, it's easier to get back in. Okay. Well, let's go back to the text of Tanya. The Baal Tanya's example for using things in a way that elevates to that we can elevate to kedusha. It's so telling because the Baal Tanya doesn't say you could eat a piece of bread and water and elevate it to kedusha. The Baal Tanya uses very extreme examples, and there's so much beauty in that because it just goes to show us that it's not what we do that matters most; it's how we do it. It's not so much the behavior. It's not what you're eating. It's the state of mind that you're in when you eat. So the examples that the Baal Tanya gives are ha'ochel, somebody who eats fat beef, not just meat, not just chicken, but the choicest cuts of meat, or somebody who drinks spiced, good quality wine. Okay. These are the good stuff of life. We're not talking about a piece of bread dipped in salt or simple foods. We're talking about good fat meat and rich, spicy, good quality wine. When we eat those things, laharchiv daite kedei lekayim mitzvahs oinik Shabbos v'yamtiv. Oh, sorry. Laharchiv daite laHashem l'terese, to broaden our minds to Hashem and His Torah, or to fulfill the mitzvah of Einig Shabbos, to enjoy the Shabbos or the Yom Tif, as long as we're aware of that, we're doing this for Hashem, so that I will have more energy in serving Hashem or in learning His Torah, or this is in honor of Shabbos Kodesh, in honor of the enjoyment. Hashem gave us a mitzvah to have pleasure, to have Einig on Shabbos and on Yom Tif. That elevates the animating food of the animating energy of this food, or this activity that we're doing is elevated to Hashem ke'oila u'kekarban, literally like a karban to Hashem. Just like a karban, when people brought a karban to Hashem, the energy was elevated to Hashem. It was like, it was elevated to Hashem. I don't think I have to explain this. It's like we just took something from a state of concealing Hashem's presence to an act that demonstrates Hashem's presence in the most meaningful, active manner. And there's a story in the Gemara where Rav Nachman said that he was able to, he told Rava, I didn't explain that halacha very well because it was before I ate meat. And because I ate meat, I was able to understand the Torah better. Now I personally don't understand Torah better after I eat a piece of anything. My eating does not do that for me, but for this tzaddik, it did. And I think that every one of us knows that there's a way of eating healthfully that gives us energy, and then there's a way of eating mindlessly or destructively that actually takes away our energy. So something so simple as eating, when I drink a cup of water, just thinking about I'm actually doing this because I want the energy to be able to serve Hashem with joy. It's such a simple thing to do. We're drinking it anyway. We're drinking the water anyway. You're saying the bracha anyway. We may as well have that intention. And when we do, we literally elevate the food to a state of holiness. And what that means is we actually invite Hashem's presence into our lives. We get a cocoon of love from Hashem, a cocoon of Hashem's light embracing us. The Baal Tanya gives more examples. Somebody who says a joke to sharpen his mind or to gladden his heart for Hashem and his Torah and his Avodah, because serving Hashem needs to be done with simcha. So a joke could be holy, right? But the same activities and the food, when used purely to indulge, the opposite happens. The energy descends. It's no longer kli pasnega. It's no longer undefined. It's now defined. It now conceals Hashem's presence with a certain sense of finality. It's more concealed than it started out. And our body becomes a vessel and a chariot for these things. And just it's helpful to know that descent, if the food was kosher and the activity was not an avera, was not something that Hashem put in the category of something that could never be elevated, if it's something that is permitted by the Torah, if it's a food or a behavior, an activity that is permitted by the Torah, that energy, the minute we say, whoops, I was unaware of Hashem's presence, Hashem, and we apologize to Hashem. We do tshuva. We return to Hashem with our whole heart. We say, Hashem, I know the truth. I am dependent on you. When we do that, all that energy that was locked in a state of concealment, because it's within us, it is elevated together with us. It returns to a state of express. Now it becomes a medium through which Hashem's truth is expressed. By the way, another example that the Baal Tanya brings is intimacy, the physical pleasure of intimacy. And I think it's so fascinating. Like, what is the Baal Tanya talking about? Food and intimacy. Like, it's so fascinating to think that although this Sefer was written hundreds of years ago, these two areas of our lives are so relevant. These are areas of our lives where the difference between using it with awareness of Hashem or forgetting about Hashem can really make such a profound impact in our lives. And we see that in a very physical way, in a very practical way. Okay, now there's two aspects of pulling stuff into klipa. There's a okay, I'm not going here. Perek Ches continues to discuss this. It talks about food and idle talk and gossip, lashon hara, chachmas hagayim, and all that. The bottom line of all of that is that any energy that is brought down to a state of concealing Hashem's truth must come up. It will all be elevated. Any action that we do is either expressing Hashem's truth or concealing Hashem's truth. And if we are concealing Hashem's truth, that energy needs to be elevated. And there's a discussion in Perek Ches about various forms of how that energy gets elevated to a state of being expressing Hashem's truth. And I'm going to stop here because I want to leave some time for discussion. And Amir Hashem, next week, we're going to continue with more of, I know that today was more technical, and next week I'm going to zip through because I feel like a lot of what we're doing we're about to get to the juiciest parts of Tanya, that battle. And we're going to be learning, practical battle strategies of how to let go of our destructive habits, how to develop a real sense of alignment with Hashem's reality. So now let's open up to discussion. If anyone has questions. Wow, that is such a great question. I'm going to repeat it for the recording. How do I catch myself before I go down the slippery slope of being unaware of Hashem's truth? Because sometimes by the time we catch ourselves, we're already, we're already far. We already are in the forest. How do we catch ourselves by that first thing? So two things. First of all, proactively connecting, proactively building awareness is very, very helpful. The visual that I always like to use is location. If I'm walking in my neighborhood, right? And I'm familiar with my neighborhood, and then I'm walking and I'm not concentrating where I'm walking, what's going to help me realize when I go one block out of my neighborhood and next door to my neighborhood is actually I live next door to not neighborhood where there's, gunfights and, drug addicts hanging out on street corners and, lots of not good stuff hanging out there. So what's gonna help me when I kind of wander into uncharted or unsafe territory? We need, in order to realize right away, we need to have two things. We need to have awareness of what our streets look, what the safe streets look like, and we have to have a lot of awareness about what the dangerous streets look like. And it's the same thing in our avodas Hashem, or in the context of our emotional wellness. We have to have a lot of clarity about what bittel, what's surrendering to Hashem's power, what does being aware of Hashem's power look like in my life? And maybe next week we should talk about that. If everyone could share some personal examples of, like, what does my eating look like when I'm aware of Hashem? And what does my eating look like when I'm not aware of Hashem? So once I think about that, I could tell you what it looks like. When I'm not aware of Hashem, I'm mindless. I binge. I'll eat things that are not healthy for me, right? All those things. So now that I spoke about it, it gave me a little bit of awareness. And now the next time I'm binge eating, I'm going to be like, oh, whoops, this is one of the things I said. This is one of the dangerous streets. Do you hear what I'm saying? So we have to have what it looks like and what the dangerous streets look like, so that and that's why we spoke about, I just put out 3 things, and I'm sure if we talk about it more, we could find more. But number 1, fear. Whenever you're feeling afraid, we're not in a place of bittel. Number 2 is compulsion and disempowerment. I kind of put them in the same place. I feel like I have no choice. I feel weak. I feel helpless. I feel like I must do something. That's a sign that I'm about to slip. Or by contrast, when I'm in a state of joy and I'm feeling, the courage to hold on to my truth, even when it's uncomfortable, that's bittel. That's what it looks like when we are bittel. But there are so many other ways, and I think that it would be a really good thing. You're really good at this. You're going to come up with some more keys. I know you're going to share it with us, right? I hope. Okay, so thank you for asking, for giving me the opportunity to clarify. So what does that process look like of if I did something and now I want to go back and repair it, right? I did something and it was not an expression of Hashem's truth. I was not aware of Hashem at the time of that action. How do I repair that? So we repair that by, a process of tshuva, by feeling regret, by, identifying what that was, by feeling regretful, and telling Hashem, I am sorry, that I did not, I'm sorry that I forgot you. I will, and making that commitment that in the future, we are going to, try to be conscious of his awareness with greater commitment and with greater strength. That's tshuva. And the sign that we really did tshuva fully is that when we're in the same situation, we experience it differently. But I really believe that all of us make mistakes about this every single day. Please correct me if anybody thinks that that's not true for you. I think because we live in a world that really denies Hashem's truth. And it's really hard to be in a state of awareness. Let's remember that our mind can only be focusing on one thing at a time. Our mind can only be focusing on one thing at a time. That means if I'm cooking, I'm going to be focused on my cooking. Okay. I'm not right now thinking about Hashem. So I think what we want to try to do is like create moments in our day. And really Yiddishkeit is built this way. There's a morning prayer. There's an afternoon prayer. There's an evening prayer. There's a mezuzah on the door. Every time we walk into the door, we notice it. There's a blessing before we eat. There's a blessing after we eat. You give charity before you start cooking. You thank Hashem. You know what I mean? There's so many, Torah observance, halacha, Jewish law is built to support awareness of Hashem. But still, even with that support, it's possible. And nobody should walk away from this session feeling bad about themselves for losing awareness and for slipping away from Hashem's truth, because this is the nature of life. And the truth is that if we never slipped away, we would never have the opportunity to come back to that place of awareness. And the purpose of our lives is to come back to a place of awareness. A tzaddik, somebody who is perfectly aware all times, in all places, in all situations, has a whole different service of Hashem. A tzaddik is not doing this kind of work that we're doing, which is exposing Hashem's truth in the very space where it's possible for him to be hidden. So if we never slipped up, and if we never had the possibility, if we could become a tzaddik, then we're out of the game. This whole sefer is not for us. This sefer is how to serve Hashem, how how the typical Jew could serve Hashem. This is a sefer how the typical person could become emotionally healthy. For a person who never struggles, they're out of the game. They're not in this game. They're done. And by being out of the game, they're not contributing to the purpose of the world, of the world's creation, which is to transform the place of concealment into a place of Hashem's truth, of a place that expresses Hashem's truth. So fear of Hashem is very different from fear of punishment. Fear of punishment, it's total ego. Only our ego cares about punishment, right? Because it's uncomfortable. Fear of Hashem is I don't want to be disconnected from Hashem. It's our ego that's worried about it right now. Our neshama trusts our connection with Hashem and trusts Hashem. Our ego doesn't want to think of ourselves as somebody who might be have to undergo a purification process in the next world. Our neshama cares about now. Our neshama wants to shine right now. Our neshama trusts our connection with Hashem. Anytime we're in a place of fear, it's our ego. What about Yirah Shamayim, fear of heaven? Fear of heaven, fear of Hashem's presence, like that to me is translated as awe. And that comes with love. That when there are certain truths that, a truth is never one end of the stick. Really, every idea, it's not one end of the stick. When you pick up one end, you're always picking up, the whole string that comes along with it. So when you pick up Hashem's truth, you also pick up his love. You also pick up his goodness, his kindness, his tolerance, his appreciation of us, his awareness of the challenges that we face, his embrace of us. You also pick up our goodness, our worthiness, our empowerment. So if you're in the place of truth, it's never going to be you fear Hashem as, only one corner of Hashem's truth. You got to be in the full space of Hashem's truth for it to be Hashem's truth. Actually, in the Upgrade to Awesome workshop, we're going to be talking about this, not next week, but maybe the week after. In the book, I talk about, you're either in the what's it called? That cycle of disempowerment, the vicious cycle of disempowerment, or the energizing cycle of Hashem's truth. In Hashem's truth, it's Hashem is the only power. He empowers us, and it's all for a purpose. There's a few ideas that have to come along with that truth. So if you're only focused on one idea and you don't have the perspective that you get from the other ideas about Hashem's truth, then that's also our ego, because our ego only cares about that. It doesn't care about the other things. Our ego doesn't have awareness of Hashem's empowerment of us or Hashem's love for us. By definition, our ego is something, a part of us that is invented out of our unawareness of Hashem. All right, my dear friends, thank you so much for joining. I want to wish you a wonderful, happy, sweet Shabbos and good health, and we can all merit Hashem's completely revealed presence with the coming of Mashiach. I look forward to meeting all of you in person.